what is different, I feel, is a perspective of pediatric neurologist for a neonatal seizure, because a perspective of neonatologist and neurologist are always a little bit different for managing these kids. And we are called when usually these seizures are refractory or there is no obvious etiology and you feel these are more epileptic or non-epileptic in origin. So it's an honor for me to give this lecture here today. So I'll start this lecture today. So outline of the presentation is a brief introduction. What is the problem status? How do we classify a neonatal seizure? What is the role of EEG in the diagnosis? What are the risk factors? How do we investigate? What are the drug treatment available? And few lines about neonatal epilepsy syndromes and how should we follow up these kids. So we know that neonatal period is the highest risk for having seizure in throughout the life, and first 1 month of life is the most vulnerable period, and it is the most common neonatal emergency, and the frequency is very high. Approximately 1 to 5 per 1,000 live births can have seizures, and it is much more in the preterm. And as we know, most of these are acute symptomatic or acute provoked seizures. Rarely these are epilepsy syndromes or metabolic disorders, and these are more subclinical than clinical. So why it is so vulnerable during this first month of life? Because there is an increased susceptibility, which is age dependent, and because of neuronal immaturity. So initially in the first few months of the brain, there is more excitotoxicity as compared to inhibition. So if you see in infants or older children, GABA is the primary inhibitor transmitter. However, in neonates, in contrast, GABA is a kindly lead to excitation. So because GABA leads to opening of chloride channel, and there's efflux of chloride, so there is a membranal depolarization, and usually there is increased action potential. So presence of excessive GABA in the neonatal period make the brain in an excitatory state. So we know GABA, the drugs which act through the GABA usually are less potent for management of seizures in these children. So benzodiazepines are usually not that useful for neonatal seizures. So risk factor we categorize in three categories. Mostly they are acute symptomatic seizures, and about 10 to 20% cases we can have a genetic or developmental brain anomalies. So etiology varies according to the day of life when we see these kids. So in the first 24 hours of seizures, which tend to happen, about 60 to 65 seizures occur in first 24 hours, and usually they are because of metabolic or HI and hypoglycemia. And after within first 24 to 72 hours, they are usually because of intraventricular hemorrhage or ischemic stroke, or in a preterm IVH or drug withdrawal, and sometimes metabolic disorders also come up in this first 24 to 72 hours. And after fourth day of life, usually more acquired causes, like you have bacterial meningitis and intrauterine infection, or sometimes neonatal epilepsy syndromes can begin if in an otherwise healthy neonate. If a sick neonate is, then usually it is a infectious process. And after the first week, usually we can have brain malformation, epilepsy syndromes, complicated bacterial meningitis and all. So etiology also gives a clue to what kind of seizures we are dealing with. So the diagnosis of neonatal seizures is always remain a dilemma for clinicians, neonatologists, because the recognition of pattern remains challenging. So sometimes it's really difficult to identify which are seizures and which are non-epileptic events. And as a rule, all the neonatal seizures are focal in onset. So they are all focal seizures, and mostly they arise from the neocortex. From neocortex, I mean that they are more arises from the cortical area of frontal and parietal area, rather than deep thalamic area or temporal lobes. And as you see, only this part of brain is responsible for motor activity. So seizures arising from this area have mostly the motor manifestation. Rest of the brain, they are arising from the temporal or frontal lobe, usually do not have this motor cortex, and usually they are more like some kind of stereotypies, or you have behavior arrest, or hypomotor components are much more common. So that's why often these seizures are subtle in nature, and it's become more difficult in identify neonatal seizures, especially in preterms and your baby, when the baby is encephalopathic. And if the drugs has been given, then usually there is electroclinical dissociation. And if the baby is on HI or with hypothermia or sedation paralysis has been given for ventilation, then it becomes much more difficult to identify seizures in these kids. Simultaneously, as there is overdiagnosis, like which events are seizures, and sometimes because of encephalopathy, paralysis, underdiagnosis is also common. So this dilemma is always there, that are we overdiagnosing neonatal seizures, or are we underdiagnosing these seizures in these? So typically, neonatal seizures occurs due to hypersynchronous cortical neuronal discharges, and they are usually stereotypic and cannot be provoked or suppressed by stimulation or change in posture. And classically, from the years when they were described initially by Volpe or Mizrahi, so they have been classified as focal clonic, multifocal tonic, or generalized tonic, or myoclonic, or subtle seizures. So subtle seizures was initially described as some kind of minor motor manifestations with some ocular abnormal movements, random eye movements, or some kind of automatism, or swimming, or progressive paddling movements, or apnea. So this was the initial classification. So this is the initial classification given by Volpe, and subsequent Mizrahi et al. Has also given classification. Further refined in terms of they were mostly focal clonic, tonic, or generalized tonic, or myoclonic epileptic spasms. And the category has been given to automatism, where it was difficult to say with the confidence that these are seizures or non-seizures, seizure activity. So I'll show you some of the videos. So we can try to attempt that. Can we clinically, can we reliably classify these events as seizure, or they are non-epileptic event? So this is the first video, term baby, day 4 of life, with some events, multiple episodes per day. Okay, so this is a first video. I think I can ask audience if they can identify. I've given the videos A, B, C, D. If they can clearly identify, they can type in the chat box that could they, what kind of seizure they feel they are. Are they seizure or non-epileptic event according to the video numbers which I've given. Okay, so another video. Same baby, another type of seizure. So some kind of sustained tonic posturing with crying, some cyanosis over the lips. Okay, so this was a video B, and so this is the video number 3. So this is video C. So this is again a late preterm baby in ICU with the admitted with the complicated perinatal period and with an IVH. So the call was sent for some kind of abnormal episodes of apnea which occurred repeatedly. So here this baby had an apnea. Okay, so some jerky movements has been observed following an apneic episode. Apnea continues, and then this baby start having regular breathing pattern again. Okay, so this was a video number C. Okay, and another video is video number 4. So you look at this video. This is again a term baby from with the history of HIE stage 1 and seizure starting from day 1 of life, otherwise uncomplicated perinatal and antenatal period. Okay, so I've shown 4 videos here. So I just want to see the chat box, how many has, okay, so sleep myoclonus, benign sleep myoclonus, okay. So I'll continue with the further. So it was really difficult to identify among these 4 events confidently to say which is Caesar. Definitely for video D, one can see that he had a cluster of epileptic spasms. So definitely video D is epileptic event. But what about video C, video B, and A? So this dilemma always remains, that are we dealing with an epileptic event and or non-epileptic event? So further work has been done to classify these events, and by 1980s and Mizrahi et al, they done studies with the neonatal seizures as well as their EEG correlation. So they further classified that some of these events are associated with EEG discharges and some of these are not associated with EEG discharges. So the seizures which are consistently associated with epileptic discharges are usually focal clonic, focal tonic, myoclonic, and spasms, and less frequently associated with consistent EED discharges were generalized tonic, and rarely some myoclonic seizures may not be associated with epileptic discharges, and automatism. So automatism were definitely were not associated with EED discharges. These were like roving or random eye movements, or buccal lingual automatism, or progressive paddling or swimming movements, or sometime other purposeless movements. So this was further they have told according to them. So if these seizures are there, you definitely think that they are clinical. Definitely they would be electroclinical seizures. However, among these group of disorders, the doubt always remains whether we are dealing with an epileptic seizure or not. So subsequent classifications were based on EEG as well as clinical semiology. So, but it was observed that the agreement between clinical observation about EEG and EEG confirmation always remains poor. So approximately 50% of these events are associated with an EEG discharge. Otherwise, 50% time they are not associated with EEG discharge. So always remains a dilemma whether to treat with drugs or not treat with the drugs. And so further, they were classified into electroclinical seizures as well as electrographic seizures. So electroclinical seizure where clinical events were associated with an evolving EEG discharges, and electrographic seizure when they were not associated with any kind of change in behavior or activity, or any kind of vital changes or phenomena or automatism. Okay, so ILE in 2014 has started this, like they have started to bring this uniformity in neonatal seizure classification. And what they observed, that the classical definition of seizures or epilepsy, they doesn't follow with the neonate. So 2 episodes of seizure within 24 hours, or having a tendency to have more seizure, doesn't apply to a neonate. So they have decided to make a separate classification for neonatal seizures, and it was initially published in 2017, and then in 2021 it is now has been framed, but it is still open for comments and questions for the pediatrician and neonatologist. So ILA described these seizures into further 7 or 8 categories. So they have classified them as either automatism, that is like less coordinated motor activity, or repetitive voluntary movements. So some kind of like chewing movements or paddling movements or swimming movements, or usually they are seen in HI or preterm. Clonic seizures has been described as jerks, usually occur in one group of muscle, and they are regular and repetitive, usually seen in focal pathologies like stroke and IVH. And third group is decided epileptic spasm. Definitely it is much more epileptic in nature. So you have a cluster of events where there is sudden flexion or extension of the body. And myoclonus are usually more brief, or they can be single or multiple, or they could be generalized or focal contraction of a single muscle or muscle group. And tonic seizures been described as sustained increase in the tone of group of muscles for a few seconds. So myoclonic seizures are usually more common in IM in preterm babies, and tonic seizures are usually more common in epilepsy syndrome. However, HIE and all, they usually tend to have more automatism or non-epileptic, non-electrographic seizures only. Another group of seizures has been described as autonomic change, when you have definitive signs or symptoms of autonomic nervous system changes like change in pupil color, vasomotor response. And these are hypomotor seizures in terms of described as behavioral ALS, where there is a baby's kind of like freezing, or there is no as such motor activity. Sequential seizures has been described, in which there is an evolution from one type to other type, that is classical sign of KCNQ2 epilepsy. And the other groups are electrographic seizure, where there is only the EEG shows seizures. Usually they occur in sedated kids or HI or preterm babies, where motor manifestations are very less, and sometimes they remain still unclassified. So this is the latest ILI classification for neonatal seizures. So these seizures can happen unilateral or bilateral, or they can be focal or multifocal, or they could be evolving. So ILI give this scheme of classifying all the seizures in all age group based on multiple seizure type, with predominant seizure type, age of onset, EEG changes to classify them epilepsy syndrome, and etiology may be hypoxic, ischemic, vascular, or genetic, and usually comorbidities are described along with that. So for sequential seizure, I just want to show you one video how the sequential seizures looks like. This is a little older 3-month-old baby with seizures. So you see a seizure type is evolving, and usually it progresses from one seizure type to another seizure type. So here is a girl, she has this epileptic spasm, some ocular movements as well as so these spasms continue, and they usually progresses to more focal or generalized seizures with for prolonged period. So in between also you can see that she has version of I, and now she has more tonic kind of spasm which is prolonged. So these are usually sequential seizures. So this is a little older baby, but same kind of pattern can be seen with neonatal seizures also. So now the questions comes, the how do we confirm the neonatal seizures? If you clinically suspect, what you should do. So correlation between a seizure and EEG remains poor. So as I told you that 50% time they do not have EEG correlation, and sometimes they are non-epileptic events and may be treated as epileptic events. So there are several studies has been published in which people have tried to establish the correlation between seizures as well as the EEG. So this was a bigger study from multicentric data from USA, which has been published for with the conventional video EEG monitoring for the first 6 hours to 72 hours, and 9 had clinically suspected seizure. However, among 571 EEG seizures has been recorded, only 19% had clinical correlate. So that data is really very thought provoking, that if we are able to identify only 19% seizures, so almost 80% seizures remains unrecognized in these kids. So another bigger study has been published with 400 neonates with continuous video EEG monitoring for approximately first 2 to 3 days. And they also noticed that among 400 EEG seizures, 24% has no clinical correlate. So in this study, 76% has clinical correlate. So that depends that who is the observer. So sometimes like if you have like non-trained staff to detect the seizure, your identification remains lesser. Or if you have a trained physician near the babies, then the identification may be much more with the clinical event, and EEG correlation must be better in these kids. So there is a group of non-epileptic seizures are also being described. So all these automatisms and non-epileptic events are classified into this group because they do not have EEG correlates. And usually they can be provoked by some kind of stimuli, or they can be suppressed by holding or restraining or repositioning the baby. They can have temporal summation or spatial summation, like they can increase in the time, as well as they can involve other parts of body also. But that doesn't make them that they have a kind of evolution in terms of rhythms and rates that we describe as a classical feature of an epileptic event. So among these, non-epileptic events are usually tonic kind of posturing. So tonic seizures are notorious for not having an EEG correlate, and motor automatisms, or usually they are considered as a brainstem release phenomena, especially in the babies with HIE, they can be seen. So some of these examples are hyperclepsia, jitteriness, tremulousness, and clonus. So video EEG monitoring has been recommended, and it is considered as a gold standard for diagnosis of neonatal seizures. So usually the classical video EEG which is used and we are using is 11 channel, and there should be ECG as well as respiratory monitoring. You can use electrooculography and EMG electrodes along with that. And 60-minute screening is recommended, but in high risk newborns, it should be for first 24 hours should be there. And neonates with HI who are hypothermia, has been given therapeutic hypothermia, should have EEG monitoring during cooling as well as rewarming. And indications are like if you have a sick or encephalopathic baby, an at-risk baby, or you have suspicion of seizures versus non-epileptic events. So this is the scheme of doing a video EEG that is gold standard. So you use 11 electrodes montage here, that is neonatal montage. And EEG is described as EEG pattern which evolves over time, and it should be evolution should be for more than 10 seconds, and amplitude should be more than 2 microvolt. And 2 episodes should be separated by a 10-second seizure-free interval. And status is defined. Status is not defined as like repetitive or seizures or uh, without improvement in consciousness is between. EEG's neonatal status is defined with the EEG diagnosis, where there is in 1 hour epoch, 1 hour EEG epochs, more than 50% epoch should have an epileptic activity. So this is an EEG of the baby, which I have shown you in the first video number B. So this was a non-epileptic, so where the baby has a tonic posturing, sustained tonic posturing with some cyanosis. And this was his video EEG, which shows almost whole of the EEG was occupied with muscle artifacts. So that was a case of hypereclepsia. So it's, and this is the we performed the glabellar tap, and with glabellar tap this baby had almost near continuous hypereclepsia, which was non-habituating. So so that's why I want to say that it's really difficult to identify which episodes are seizure and which are non-epileptic in nature in newborns. And this is another video EEG I want to show. This is a late preterm baby who had seizures from day 2 of life, and mother was COVID positive 14 days before this baby was born, and baby had neonatal encephalopathy and seizures from day 2, which was controlled with phenobarbital. However, he continued to have some jerky events for which he was brought to us, and this EEG was done on day 14 of life. So we can see this background is really bad with the so video is not of very good quality, but you can see that this baby had a very bad kind of EEG, where there is almost flat kind of background. I am reading this at 5 microvolt, but there is no activity, and whatever activity is there, it is associated with some kind of abnormal burst of discharges. So this was a possibly very low amplitude background activity with some kind of epileptic myoclonus. So another example of background EEG abnormality. So this was a baby with the neonatal seizures with HI, admitted as HI, but was seizures remained refractory to phenobarbital as well as levetiracetam and phenytoin. He was given B6 and subsequently he remained seizure free. So this was his EEG, which showed a kind of burst and suppression pattern. Another example of EEG in this baby who's a term born with the EEG done on 42 weeks of life, which we can show this almost bad EEG with low amplitude activity with some kind of burst of activity, which is asynchronous in nature. Again, flat background. So these are some of the examples which I want to show that how the classical video EEG remains a gold standard for diagnosis of neonatal seizures, where we can definitely say with the confidence these are associated with abnormal activity. But as I said, it's a gold standard. However, it requires lots of experience in terms of placing the montage, knowing how to place the montage, as well as how to read this EEG, because among all the ages, reading a neonatologist, reading a newborn EEG is much more complex because of it gets the EEG gets evolved along with as the baby matures in terms of weeks. So every week there is some kind of a new pattern which is described as that may be normal for that particular age of the newborn. So this amplitude integrated EEG has been evolved subsequently to sort out this problem and give a more kind of compressed record to neonatologists who can identify whether they are dealing with the seizure or not. So usually it has 1 or 2 channels, and signals are filtered and they are presented on the log scale, and the time is compressed. So in continuous video EEG, we see every second record. However, amplitude integrated EEG presents a compressed data. So approximately 1 hour EEG is compressed into 6 centimeter recording. And these are the some patterns which are described normal and abnormal in the amplitude integrated EEG, which should be this should be familiar to neonatologists who are near the bedside of the baby, just to identify whether they are dealing with an abnormal background or abnormal ictal discharges. So this is an example of amplitude integrated EEG where the 2 channels are used in as compared to, like, there are 4 electrodes as compared to 11 electrodes which are used in conventional EEG. So among these 2 channels, right and left are represented. So these are C3P3 and C4P4, and this is the compressed record, which is like 6 centimeter, like these are 1 centimeter time scale, and 6 of these blocks represent 1 hour of recording. So much more compressed in terms of time. And the amplitude is this is the 0 line, and this is 5 microvolt, this is 10 microvolt, and subsequently it is log scale. So the normal, this is a normal representation of normal term baby with, you can see this sinusoidal pattern, which is like normal activity in sleep as well as awake. So this is how, and this is the one part of this area is selected, and it is represented here among this 1 hour recording. And you can see the actual EEG recording as same in the seconds, as this is the seconds, the normal seconds are given. So this is the example of normal newborn with the normal term newborn, where you can have areas of quiet sleep as well as active sleep, and some wakefulness period is also there. So usually the amplitude lies between the 5 microvolt, and it should be above 10 microvolt. So usually less than 25 microvolt. So the normal EEG remains in this range of voltage activity. It should not be near to the 0. So this is represents a normal sleep wake cycling in a term newborn. So this is the how the electrodes are placed. So this is left and right, and C3P3 and C4P4 are placed, and this is the normal activity, and this is the sinusoidal activity in the normal newborn. However, this is an abnormal record where you see that this amplitude are reaching up to 0, and you have a seesaw kind of pattern. So this is suggestive of an electrical seizure. And if you see, this is the record which is taken at this point of time. And in this 10-second record, you can see he has a rhythmic discharges of approximately, which is present in this both the hemisphere. Actually, it is present in the left as well as right, and you can see it is present at 1 hertz frequency. So every second has a one abnormal waveform which is present here. So this represents an ongoing seizure in this amplitude integrated EEG. So these are the other examples of amplitude integrated EEG. Basically, it is a pattern recognition, and we should remember some of these common patterns which are seen in these newborns who are at risk of seizure. So this is the normal pattern, which is presents above 5 and between 10 to 25, and it is a normal EEG record of this particular time, and it shows normal kind of pattern. And this is moderately abnormal, where the amplitudes are coming towards 0 and it is going up to 25. So this is abnormal background activity, and this pattern is towards 0, and there are episodes of discontinuity between. And so this represents a burst suppression kind of pattern. So you have a burst of activity, then there is a suppression, burst of activity followed by a suppression. So this represents a suppression burst pattern in a amplitude integrated EEG. And this is a low amplitude record, where you can see the record is reaching up to 0. So low amplitude discontinuous record, and this is kind of isoelectric record. So there is not much activity. Some of these activities recorded just because of movement artifacts or so. So these are the common pattern we should remember when we apply these amplitude integrated EEG in the neonatal units. So this is an record of seizure basically. So this is the left and this is the right. If you see that suddenly there is a transition in the right side, so the amplitude has gone from 10 microvolt up to 100 microvolt here. So, and if this point, if you see this is in the enhanced frame, you have a normal waveform on the left hemisphere, but in the right hemisphere, you have this regular rhythmic spike wave discharges. So this gives an, so this is particularly easy for the neonatologist just to see the trend. And if you find some abnormal activity in terms of amplitude as well as background activity, so you go to that particular area and see that what kind of activity it is showing at that particular time. So it helps in real-time monitoring. So some of these seizures has a good correlation. So with the EEG. So as I told you, focal clonic seizures usually has a vascular disorder or electrolyte disturbances. In vitamin-related disorders like pyridoxine-dependent epilepsy, you can have multifocal discharges. If BP or AI, and for clonic, so these are some of the conditions which can have some EEG signatures. So we should remember that. So this is an algorithm. So if you have suspected clinical seizure and your infant is at high risk, newborn is high risk, so simultaneously evaluate for etiology. And if you have suspicion of clinical seizure, put them on EEG. It could be conventional video EEG versus amplitude integrated EEG. And you confirm seizure, then you rapidly treat them. If you don't have seizure, try to record 2 or 3 typical events. And if they are not associated with any kind of ictal discharges, you can stop EEG and decide not to treat these events. So again, this is an ILA flow diagram which they have given. How do you classify them? So confirm with the video EEG or amplitude integrated EEG. Non-ictal phenomena, just leave them. If you have seizure, then further classify them further with the description of motor or non-motor phenomena like sequential seizures or hypomotor seizures versus motor or epileptic spasm, or sometimes you can just have electrographic seizures. So now coming to the risk factor for neonatal seizures, and so all we know that almost 85% seizures are symptomatic in nature, and most common are HIE, stroke or hemorrhage, or CNS infection, malformation, and genetic and metabolic disorders are responsible for approximately 15% of cases. So the most of the chunk is because of hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. The rest are your malformation, infections, and infarct or hemorrhages. So this table represents over the year what is the trend of etiology for the neonatal seizure. So if we see that HIE remains still the most common cause approximately in 50 to 60% cases, and other are metabolic. Intracranial hemorrhages or vascular events are responsible for around 18% of the events. Infection around 5 to 10%, may be more common in our setting rather than in Western setting. Malformation are approximately 5 to 10%, and other are epilepsy syndrome, inborn error of metabolism, and intoxication. So these are the sum of risk factor like stroke, acute ischemic infarcts. There are some risk factor for that. CSVT in the term newborn presents as superior sagittal sinus and transverse sinus thrombosis. So CSVT is an, we should know that it is an important cause of brain hemorrhage in IVH in a term born baby. In preterm, it could be medullary venous thrombosis, and ICH can occur secondary to prematurity, coagulopathy, and all. So other groups are CNS infection, that could be meningitis, meningoencephalitis, IO infection. Now we are seeing children with COVID, newborn with COVID, which are affected during the perinatal period, are having issues with the epilepsy as well as developmental issues are there. Other groups are metabolic disorders. Or rarely we can have IMs, so urea cycle disorder, organic acidemia, amino acidopathies, neurotransmitter disorders like pyridoxine, PNPO, folinic acid responsive seizures, and other are like you have sulfite oxidase, molybdenum cofactor, and some large molecular defects like PVD, peroxisomal disorders, they can also present with seizures in the neonatal period. These are some of the examples of cortical malformation which we see presenting with seizures, not immediately in the newborn, but within first month of life. So usually they are gross malformations like holoprosencephaly, lissencephaly, lobar holoprosencephaly, hemimegalencephaly, schizencephaly, as well as the Scarpus callosal agenesis, as well as heterotopias. So these are the common, some of these malformations which are responsible for seizures in the neonatal period. Now, the other group is neonatal epilepsy syndrome. So among these, we have three groups of disorders, that is benign familial neonatal epilepsy, other group is benign idiopathic, and third is severe epileptic encephalopathy, which were previously described as early infantile epileptic encephalopathy, and now they are described as more as developmental encephalopathy. So developmental as well as epileptic encephalopathy, abbreviation being used is DE. So it is a commonly used term now. And in this group, we have early myoclonic as well as Ohtahara syndrome. So coming to benign familial neonatal epilepsy, usually it is autosomal dominant. With the family history, seizures usually occur in the first week, that is typically 5 to 6 days of life. And usually they are brief seizures lasting for a few seconds, and multiple episodes of seizure usually subsides with drugs, and within first few weeks, patient remains seizure free, and your examination, imaging, and EEGs are normal. Or during ictal period, you can have some discharges, and interictal period may show a theta pontu kind of pattern. So another group is benign idiopathic neonatal seizure, where there is a family history is negative, but usually they develop seizure between 4 to 6 days of life, and also known as fifth day fits, and usually resolve within 2 weeks. And usually the seizures are focal clonic or apnea in nature, and they are usually associated with KCNQ2 mutations, also known as KCNQ2 encephalopathy. These are more kind of severe epileptic encephalopathy, that is early myoclonic encephalopathy and Ohtahara syndrome. So typically they present with myoclonus, and Ohtahara presents with the tonic seizures. So IMs usually presents with myoclonic encephalopathy, and malformation usually presents with Ohtahara syndrome, and EEG will show a bus suppression pattern, as I've already shown you. So this paper we have published with the etiological profile of children's newborns from Advanced Pediatric Center. So again, etiology resembles what we have seen from the Western countries in the previous slides. HI remains the most common. Metabolic disorders like hypocalcemia, hypoglycemia, they are responsible for 34% cases. Infection, again 20%. As I told you, much more common in our cohorts rather than Western cohort, where it is less than 5%. IVH, hyponatremia are also common etiologies. So usually they start at day 2 of life and subside by day 4 of life. And the semiologies are generalized tonic, focal clonic, subtle, myoclonic, and myoclonic. So we used this previous classifications here, and this was not supported with video EEG continuous. So the classification, still we can see the clinical classification, tonic seizure are still much more diagnosed. So evaluation for the etiology, because they are mostly represents an injury to the brain. So we should evaluate them with the while we are treating. So electrolytes, glucose, infections, imaging. Usually CT is avoided. MR is the modality of choice. And if you suspect stroke and hemorrhage, then MR angio and MR venography is required. So this is the metabolic workup. Never forget a pyridoxine trial in children who doesn't respond to your initial dose of phenobarbital and phenytoin. So 100 milligram IP pyridoxine is required. And further workups include, if everything is normal, your metabolic and genetic workup. If you think epilepsy syndrome, then genetic is required. So this is an algorithm. How do you evaluate? So in HI, confirm with the MRI. And if you think it is a stroke, then workup for stroke is required. Echocardiography, thrombophilic factors. If you have suspected infection, then CSF studies, PCRs, cultures. And if you continue to have seizure, but you don't have these three groups of disorder or no malformation in image, then go for metabolic testing. So, so treatment, so initial treatment is with glucose, correction of hypocalcemia, hypomagnesemia, antibiotics, and always think about drug withdrawal also, because common problem in this part of country. And this, we have published this letter to editor with the importance of pyridoxine trial in early infantile epilepsy. So, so it should never be forgotten while you're in your armamentarium of AEDs. Keep pyridoxine always at the number 2. After your phenobarb, if you have spasms or myoclonic seizure, always give pyridoxine. Though it is a rare, but if you see the frequency is 1 in approximately 1 lakh. So although it is a rare cause, but is entirely treatable, and you can change the outcome of the baby entirely if you have early treatment of early identification as well as early treatment. So predominant seizure type are myoclonic or spasms or sequential seizures as they continue to evolve into different kinds. And these remains refractory to anticonvulsants. So, but single dose of IV pyridoxine works. If there is no response, you can repeat one more dose, and this is followed by oral 30 mg per kg per day. So coming to the drug treatment of neonatal seizures, so phenobarbital remains a gold standard. It is still the recommended first line agent, and it is given as a loading, and up to 40 mg per kg per day can be given with subsequent IV fosphenytoin, just because it has similar efficacy, but it is relatively safe with less exacerbation injury. And levetiracetam is being more increased offline, as well as now the trials has been published with the NeoLive trial, where they said that both the drugs phenobarbital and levetiracetam has got good efficacy, but phenobarbital has a higher efficacy. So almost 80% seizure responded with phenobarbital, and levetiracetam approximately 53%. So that the explanation the authors has been given, that it depends on the amount or dose of levetiracetam which has been used. So it is recommended at 40, but up to 100 and 150 mg per kg has been used in some of the studies. So other groups are like, if you have, there is no response, then you can use lidocaine infusion or midazolam infusion. Lidocaine is usually contraindicated in presence of a heart disease, and if previously has been treated with fosphenytoin. So currently it is a recommended drug for treatment of neonatal seizures. So so there were several of the studies has compared the efficacy of phenobarbital versus phenytoin. So this was the first trial which was published in NEJM in 19. Efficacy was 43% in phenobarb and 45% in phenytoin. So they said equal efficacy is there. And subsequently, systematic reviews has been conducted and comparing phenobarb with levetiracetam. But always the efficacy of phenobarb remains higher than levetiracetam. But the concern of safety is always there with phenobarb, because it is in animal models, it has been noted that it causes accelerated apoptosis of neurons. So levetiracetam is emerging as a second line AED. So again, this is an algorithm where you have neonatal seizures with initial 20 to 30 mg per kg loading, confirm with the EEG. If with first loading, if it stops, then it's good. If it doesn't stop, then go to the second line AED. There is no consensus about the second line AED, but you can choose based on the clinical setting and your comorbidities and seizure severity. Like if you have no cardiac or hepatic issues or no shock, use fosphenytoin. If you have cardiac, shock, or instability or hepatic disorder, use levetiracetam. If you have status epilepticus, go for lidocaine or midazolam infusion. And if you have all controlled setting like ventilated, then everything, then midazolam infusion is the drug which is required for treatment of status. So now you have treated the acute seizure, then how to about maintenance therapy. So most of the risk for acute symptomatic seizure in these newborns is maximum between first 24 to 48 hours, and usually they subside by 96 hours. However, you take your decision based on etiology, EEG findings, as well as what is kind of a seizure character and frequency to stop the AEDs. And so it is recently several studies has been published which shows that early discontinuation is safe in these kids. So this was a study published in JAMA recently, where they have compared, it was a retrospective study. So 64% were continued and 36% were discontinued. So the seizure recurrence was approximately 14% and 11%. So they were equal in both the group, and their developmental scores was also equal. So authors have suggested that anti-seizure medication can be safely discontinued at the discharge time. So subsequently, we have conducted this randomized control trial regarding early withdrawal of phenobarbital. So again, 313 units we have enrolled in this study, and so in our study we have withdrawal after phenobarbital loading after 12 hours of loading. If we have withdrawal this phenobarbital, if there are no more further seizures, so approximately 112 patients were withdrawal, and in 109 it was continued. So seizure recurrence up till discharge, it was 50% and 37%. The seizure recurrence is higher in our cohort because the withdrawal was early, like after 12 hours the maintenance was not given, and it was stopped. And in this group maintenance was given, so they had equal kind of seizure recurrence. So again, early withdrawal of phenobarbital does not increase the risk of seizures. So the ideal way could be like you continue till discharge. After your 96 hour, the risk period is over, you can decide about stopping these drugs. So what is the risk of long-term epilepsy? So about 10 to 15% kids with neonatal seizure develop epilepsy or infantile spasms. So this was a large study published from USA where they have included acute symptomatic seizures with EEG confirmation. And the etiology was again Ajai, stroke, IVH, and it was treated with phenobarbital. And in this study, 13% children neonates developed epilepsy by 24 months of age. And usually the seizure epilepsy started at 7 months of life. So around 35% of these kids developed infantile spasm. So these children needs follow-up during after discharge because the risk of epilepsy is still there. And the predictors for epilepsy, development of epilepsy in the later life was severely abnormal EEG backgrounds, higher number of seizures, EEG confirmed seizures, and need of 2 or more anti-seizure medication were and predictor of development of epilepsy, as well as abnormal discharge examination. So this was the outcome that we should know that approximately around 10 to 15% kids are at risk of developing epilepsy. And usually the third month follow-up EEG do not predict development of epilepsy. So the traditional practice of getting a EEG at third month and then stopping the drugs usually does not help much. But if you have during neonatal period, if you have kind of highest EEG seizure burden, then they are at risk. A presence of hypsarrhythmia or asymmetry in third month EEG may suggest that these kids may develop epileptic spasm later on. So these, as I already told you about neonatal epilepsy syndrome. So when we should suspect neonatal epilepsy syndrome, when you don't have obvious etiology, MR is negative, you don't have HI and any other risk factor, and then neonatal epilepsy syndrome should be suspected because treatment is different, and these kids need long-term AEDs, as well as they need follow-up for developmental encephalopathy. So this is a large cohort in which like they have followed some 400 neonates, and they have found that 20 neonates developed epilepsy in the postnatal life, post-neonatal age, and these were the genes associated with epilepsy. So KCNQ2, Q3, SCN2A. So these are the genes associated with developmental epilepsy, epileptic encephalopathy. And usually they have tonic or myoclonic seizures. So I wind up my presentation here. So just summarizing the key points that it is a common neonatal emergency, and 85% seizures are symptomatic secondary to acute brain injury, and about 15 have genetic and metabolic etiologies. And electroclinical seizures are equally common. So 50% may be only electroclinical or electrical seizures, and 50% may be clinical. And video EEG with the traditional 11-channel neonatal montages are gold standard for diagnosis. However, amplitude integrated EEG an option for neonatologists because it is required less kind of training and less labor intensive. Among drug therapy, phenobarbital remains the time-tested drug, but never forget a pyridoxine trial. That is a message from pediatric neurologists, that you may find kids with who have a good outcome during follow-ups. And AEDs can be safely stopped at discharge. when the risk period has already been passed. So there is no need to continue long-term AEDs in these patients. And if you have risk factor, like as I've told you, bad EEG, more seizures, lots of anti-epileptic requirement, abnormal discharge examination, these kids are at risk and should be followed up regularly in high-risk follow-up clinics. So thank you. I thank neonatology team at Lucknow, Dr. Akash, as well as I thank my team at PGI Chandigarh, our senior residents, our students, families who have shared these videos with me for this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for that lucid presentation. And I think you have covered everything I wanted to ask, but we have many questions for you. Before that, I would like to thank you on behalf of Lucknow Neonatology Foundation and all my team and participants for sparing your valuable time and being with us. Now, I would like to welcome today's moderator, Dr. VC Manoj sir from Kerala. Sir is MD, MSc Neo Medicine and is trained from Cardiff University. Sir is currently head Department of Neonatology, Jubilee Mission Medical College at Thrissur, Kerala. Sir is in fact one of the most active neonatologists I have ever seen on this planet. Sir is currently heading many academic pieces which are appreciated by one and all across the country. Sir has published various papers in national and international journal besides various book chapters. Sir is an active member and is coordinator for research of IIP and NNF postdoctoral fellowship. Sir is member of NNF and has been past president of National Neonatology Forum Kerala, past president of IIP Thrissur, and currently is secretary of NNF Kerala. Sir has in fact during this endemic, sir has made this endemic an advantage for students because nowadays we can sit in our rooms and listen to not only from speakers from India but across the globe. Thank you so much, sir, on behalf of students of neonatology and pediatrics for providing us with those opportunities. Without wasting much time, over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Akash, for those kind words. Respected seniors and my dear friends, it's a privilege to be with this August forum. I missed the first part of the talk because I was engaged somewhere else, but then whatever I could hear, a very lucid presentation. We'll straight away go on to the questions and then we'll discuss things later. So, first question is, Dr. Renu, when to discontinue anti-epileptics and how to decide for discontinuation of anti-epileptics in neonates, factors to consider. I thought you covered some of it in your talk. Please clarify.
So the highest risk of having seizures lies between first 24 to 96 hours of life. If you have acute risk or acute provoked seizures, after that the risk decreases. So at that time you can decide that before discharge, if there are like you don't have as I've told you, the risk factor which predicts that later on neonatal epilepsy or neonatal follow-up postnatal epilepsy can develop. These are like having a very bad EEG, a very high seizure burden, requirement of 2 or more AEDs, and abnormal examination at discharge. So these are the risk factor which predicts development of future epilepsy or epileptic spasm. So if you have none of these, then definitely you can stop these AEDs before discharge in these patients. So after 96 hours, definitely you can stop these drugs. If you have these risk factor, you still can stop AEDs, but keep this kid in a follow-up because there is a lag between development of epilepsy and discharge. So by 6 or 7 months, these kids tend to develop later on epilepsy. So keep them on follow-up.
Excellent. So the stoppage of anticonvulsants rather need to be individualized to each case. Yeah. Like you are talking about a symptomatic asymptomatic baby with no neuroimaging positivity, then probably your threshold will be stopping as early as 48 to 96 hours. But when there is a problem, then you would consider other things and stop. Now, when you stop these anticonvulsants, now how are you going to, like, suppose you put the baby on 2 or 3 anticonvulsants, what is the usual protocol that you follow?
So first thing is that if you have given AED for less than 2 weeks, there is no need of tapering these drugs. So you can straight away stop these drugs. And the dictum is the last one should go the first. So if you have like used levetiracetam as a third option, so then it should be the one which should go. And as in the sequence which I've used, you can decide to taper it off. The phenobarb is usually the last one to go because it is the first AED and most potent kind of AED for the neonatal seizures.
Now, there is a specific question which I found very interesting. Any role of lactosamide in neonatal status refractory to first and second line AEDs?
So among the what the drugs are recommended are usually the phenobarb, levetiracetam, fosphenytoin, midazolam infusion, and lidocaine. But you have other drugs which can be used for neonatal seizure. Usually they are not FDA approved for use, but off-label these has been used. So among these, topiramate we use in some refractory cases, as well as lacosamide can be used for status epilepticus, but they have not been approved for use in the neonates.
Okay, now I'm not sure whether you covered this in the first part of your talk, like it's about the choice and should we give benzodiazepines about active seizures before loading with phenobarbital? Should we always add maintenance dose of phenobarbital in case of doubtful seizures, etc.? I'm not sure you covered this, and so you want to make any remarks regarding this?
So if you have seizure in the neonate, usually the recommendation is just to go with the phenobarbital. So usually diazepam is not the drug which works. Lorazepam has been used as a it has been used in like more than 1 month. It is a first line agent. Like you give benzodiazepine before loading onto phenytoin. But in neonates, it's usually you load with the phenobarb if you have a suspicion of seizure. So there comes the role of EEG. If you have suspicion, then confirm with the EEG findings. Depending on what facilities you have, with either with video EEG or with amplitude integrated EEG, or you just give one dose and observe that what is the pattern of recurrence if you don't have facility for EEG confirmation in these cases.
Great. So basically, you have clinical seizures where you really don't know whether they are actually seizures, and the various studies, if you are going to look at, most of them have shown that you are more than 50% wrong about a clinical seizures interpretation. So then, and most of the centers do not have at least the continuous real-time monitoring. Like probably what we should be aiming for is a CSM, continuous monitoring, which the brain monitoring, which probably we will not. If we do not have, we may not be able to really know. So we need to follow these guidelines in such scenarios. Now, there is some question on dose of midazolam infusion. Dr. Renu, you want to take it?
Yeah. So regarding the last question, I want to say the highest clinical and EEG agreement lies for your clonic seizures, focal clonic seizures, epileptic spasms, as well as myoclonic seizures. Least correlation lies with automatism, progressive movement, as well as tonic posturing. So this judgment you can use that you are dealing with a true seizure versus non-epileptic phenomena. Then you can wait and watch. Maybe you can observe 2 or 3 events. If you still feel that they have recurrence, they are not stimulus provoked, then you can go for deciding to treat those events. So midazolam infusion is usually used at 1 to 5 microgram per kg per minute as infusion as we use in the status epilepticus protocol.
Okay, there is one more question about the drug and it's not the dose, the role of sodium valproate in seizures, neonatal seizures.
Usually it is not a preferred drug for a neonatal seizures because the risk of hepatitis is much more. So it is not a recommended drug for treatment of a neonatal seizures. So
great.
We are also not using valproate for neonatal seizures. After 2 months of life, we use valproate.
Great. Now, some question regarding the outcome. Prognosis of hemorrhagic seizures depending on grading of IBH. I don't know what that means.
So the prognosis of neonatal seizures, as I told you, about 13 to 15% kids develop long-term epilepsy as well as epileptic spasm. So the prognostic factor are the number of seizures, duration of encephalopathy, burden of seizures, abnormal examination. If you have, then any of the etiology can lead to progression to a definite epileptic state later on. So it could be IVH, it could be infarct, it could be CSVT, or it could be HIE. So all these can culminate into an epileptic phenomenon later in the life if you have bad kind of initial EEG production or higher seizure burden, or number of AEDs are much more, babies obtended, then the risk are much more.
And there is a question on what is the MRI pattern in HIE.
This can be a whole separate talk itself. So several patterns has been described. Depend on the day of day of the life when you do this MRI, from diffusion weighted changes to changes in the posterior limb of internal capsule to the Rolandic area to diffuse encephalomalacia. So there is a whole lot of spectrum depending on what kind of HI is there. So that can be a separate talk itself. So there's lots of MR literature is available for HI.
Now, can initial 100 milligram of pyridoxine be also be given orally as IV preparations are when IV preparation is not available?
So IV preparation as such, isolated pyridoxine is not available. What we use is your multivitamin preparation, where you use for vitamin B12. So it contains 100 milligram of pyridoxine, 100 milligram of thiamine, as well as 1000 milligram of B12. So we are using this preparation for IV use, and but definite recommendation and to see response is IV only. But if it is not there, then 30 mg per kg per day oral pyridoxine can be given. But it's difficult to judge that what response is terms, because these neonates may be acutely sick. So you cannot wait for to see that I'll give and I'll withdraw and then I'll reintroduce. So that kind of thing is not recommended. So give IV pyridoxine 100 followed by one more shot of 100. If you have monitoring facility, give under monitoring, because it can lead to apnea as well as sometimes cardiovascular instability also can occur.
So you would not give oral?
No, we don't give. We give an IV pyridoxine.
Okay, great. Now, is it mandatory to do a LP in neonates with seizures but sepsis screen is negative?
I think this can be taken by neonatologist itself. But as a neurologist, I do recommend that CNS infection are very serious condition and it is almost entirely treatable, but we should not be missing a single case of meningitis, because the outcomes are really, really bad in terms of long-term outcome, bad epilepsy, bad neurological outcome, ventriculitis. So I'll suggest go for a CSF. Do not be in a dilemma. Always rule out.
I just come from a session where we were discussing neonatal sepsis, and probably one of the questions was on similar lines, when to do LP. So, like the standard teaching is that in all early neonatal sepsis, you need to customize. You don't need to always do, but in late neonatal sepsis, probably whenever you diagnose as late neonatal sepsis, you need to do LP. Now, this is far complex than is said, because the difference between the early and late sepsis is losing its relevance because of various reasons, and you need to actually individualize. We are living in an era of precision medicine, which means that you do not offer the same treatment for the same illness to two different patients. It has to be individualized. So the question is very difficult to answer by an yes or no. If you suspect sepsis, then even if sepsis screen is negative, you should be doing LP. If you are very sure it is not due to sepsis, then whether you want to do, probably no, because you need to always get a consent from a parent. If I am the parent, I would think twice before giving consent in such scenario. So
but
it
if
is
you explain the parent that the prognosis may be really dismal if it is a meningitis and it is not being ruled out, then definitely parent will agree for it.
No, I definitely agree. If you suspect sepsis, you have to do. Whether parent agree, you have to make them convinced. Yeah. But if you are yourself thinking of some other etiology, then just because it is mandatory to do like that, when you tell some other parents, they may not agree. That is what I meant to say. Okay, now going on to another question: is hyperplexia a sign of HIE? Will it warrant metabolic screening?
Hypereclepsia is a genetic condition where there is a problem in a glycine metabolic pathway. So it has to be suspected clinically, confirmed with the EEG or as well as globular tap, which shows non-habituating kind of startle, and it is confirmed with the genetic testing. So metabolic testing does not give you much idea about hyperclepsia. If it is suspected, then it has to be confirmed with the genetic testing.
Okay, great. Now, in a neonate, if the etiology of seizures comes to be hypocalcemia, then should calcium supplementation be given, or should add given for some? You should not be, if you had a seizure and then you know it is a specific cause, you treat the cause. You will not give this. The concept of giving anticonvulsant, as far as the neonatal perspective, is that whether you give the anticonvulsant or not, the outcome is not going to be much different in these cases. Only in a sick case where seizures worsen the hemodynamic instability, you need to really treat. Otherwise, just because the answer to seizures is not anticonvulsant, it is treating the etiology. And then when the seizures is ongoing and it's going creating more problem, then probably you should give. You want to say anything, Dr. Renu?
I totally agree with you. All metabolic seizures need correction of that metabolic abnormality. In those cases, valproate loading or long-term AEDs are not required. You correct the cause, because development of epilepsy is later on these kids. If you have hypoglycemia, if they are symptomatic seizure, so giving AED at that time does not change your outcomes. You may later on develop in occipital gliosis or epilepsy, but usually there is a lag. So giving AED at that particular time does not help much. So treat the metabolic cause.
Fine. Now, what is the significance of AEG report of gross cerebral dysfunction? AEG per se is a talk by itself. I'm not sure. Okay, anyway, you can your
so neonatal EEGs are more difficult to report as compared to pediatric EEG and as compared to adult EEG. So you have to report in terms of the gestational age as well as postnatal age of these babies. So what we are interested is what kind of continuity, what kind of amplitude is there, what kind of normal physiological changes with sleep and awake are there or not. So these define a normal. But if you have like very low discontinuous background, totally discontinuous, trace discontinua, bus suppression pattern, usually these are more kind of sinister EEGs. So diffuse cerebral dysfunction, I don't know how to say, but you need to go and see the EEG graphs, show that what time, what. So we really go for the graphs actually.
So that is a very the thing. You should not really like EEG is very difficult to interpret. Probably what is very simple for idiots like me is cerebral function monitoring, CFM or AEG. It's very easy. Anybody knows how to interpret. So if you probably, and in your I believe most are trainees in this this is a training program, so you should know how to interpret AEG. EEG interpretation, of course, the patterns you should know, but then the final, even if you know the pattern, when you're shown an EEG, it's very difficult to sometimes interpret. Even the neurologist, the pediatric neurologists sometimes go through a very, a lot of discussions before they interpret. It's very difficult. But CFM is not like that. Cerebral function monitoring, AEG, is very simple, and all of you should know how to draw a basic pattern, the various patterns that you get and all that. Now, under what settings should one consider clinical exome analysis in neonatal seizures, and when should one plan to send it? Good question.
So, so I told you, if you don't have acute symptomatic etiology, like you do not have the conventional risk factor in terms of HI, stroke, IVH, as well as your electrolyte disturbances, and if your image is normal or may show some kind of malformation in these cases, and if you have a family history and you go for exome, sometimes clinical seizure type also gives you a clue towards metabolic etiology. As I've shown you the video number 4, where there was a sequential epileptic spasm in a baby with some abnormal eye movement, these gives a clue towards a paradoxal independent epilepsy. So that is the most common treatable cause. So in these cases, go for clinical exome sequences. You may diagnose neonatal epilepsy syndrome. You may diagnose an early infantile epileptic encephalopathy, or you may have metabolic disorder. Before that, you go for a TMS, GCMS, and basic metabolic screen before going to an exome. Even in malformation also, you can go for exome if you have a family history or specific gene is associated with like lissencephaly, as well as heterotopia. You have some genes associated. So if the family history suggests or a genetic diagnosis is required, go for an exome sequence.
Great. Now, another question I see is in the case of multiple drug therapy, why do we remove the last added drug first, even though seizure control was through the same? That's a very good question.
Because the last drugs are usually the most sedative agents. So last drugs are usually lidocaine, lidocaine or midazolam infusion, lacosamide. So these are the drugs which are used as a last resort. So much safety data is not available and they are more sedating agents. So always it's good to take out the last drugs which you have used for seizure control. But
Dr. Rahul Dikshit, you asked the question. I really like that question. So there is actually, I would slightly differ. Please correct me if I am wrong. Like, because most of the time now people have gone away from phenobarbital being the first drug because of its potential for cellular apoptosis and also the electrophysiologic dissociation. So because of that, suppose there are centers in this country and outside which do use levetiracetam as a first drug. Now, in such a scenario, when you use levetiracetam is much less effective than phenobarbital, but because it's less toxic and you are not in a scenario where you are really worried, you want to start, you started levetiracetam and then you later on you realize, no, this is not enough, I need to add on something, and you added phenobarbital. Now, when you stop, of course, here which one you stop, obviously you want to stop the toxic drug first. So if you want to stop in this scenario, I may stop phenobarbital first, if depending on the scenario. And in a scenario where I started pheno and then added on levetiracetam, still I may stop pheno first. So the toxicity of the drug also may play a role. But even though that is the case, the general dictum is the drug that you started last, you stop first. Agree, Dr. Renu?
So in my slides, I've shown one study which is published in JAMA. So this was a big study where they followed approximately 300 kids who received phenobarbital, and they were followed up to 2 years. And the seizure post neonatal epilepsy was 11 to 13% in both the groups, were stopped or continued, and even the developmental outcomes were equal in both the groups. So the risk is more theoretical based on the previous mouse models. But still, people are going away from the phenobarb. But you can go back and see the NeoLIV study. The efficacy of levetiracetam is much less, 53% only, as compared to the phenobarb, which is effective in 80%. So I will suggest that, I'll say that do not go for seizures which should be uncontrolled and continue for a longer time. But if you have suspicion, like you have non-epileptic event or really doubtful in seizure, you may choose to give levetiracetam in those settings.
Excellent.
Although multiple people have tried multiple drug therapies as a first line for anticonvulsant, but nothing as of now could replace phenobarbital in terms of efficacy.
Agree,
And we
totally
still-
agree. Phenobarbital has stood the test of time. It was, I mean, like nothing. All the so many other drugs have come and gone. They are all one-time wonders. They come and go. But still the fact remains that it is a toxic drug. That is why all these drugs try to come to replace, and then the scenario goes on. It's
But if the
evolving scenario.
seizures are not well controlled, they itself can lead to brain injury. That again we have to keep in mind.
Definitely, definitely. Now, Dr. Akash, do you want to continue? Because I'm not seeing some of the. Are there more questions left? I see one more question. No, two more questions are there. Any specific AED to be avoided in suspected IEM associated seizure in neonates?
So valproate is a drug which should be avoided. That's why it's not a preferred drug for the neonatal age group. Even if it is mitochondrial disorders, it is organic acidemia, valproate may create problem with function. So that should, otherwise phenobarb, phenytoin, they are safer. For phenytoin concern is cardiac issue. If you have cardiac dysfunction, heart disease, then phenytoin is lesser preferred. And so valproate should not be used.
Okay. When to consider apnea as seizure manifestation in preterms?
Yeah, that is a difficult question. Without kind of EEG monitoring, it's difficult. But most of the time, if you think apnea is seizure, it is associated with some kind of motor manifestations. So as I've shown in video number 3, where was a newborn who was like on nasal prongs with the CPAP. He had an episodes of apnea, but if you clearly observe, it was associated with some myoclonic movement. So only apnea is less commonly associated with EEG discharges. If apnea is associated with your some motor manifestation, definitely it can be epileptic phenomenon. But answer lies in EEG. That's why many people are going from clinical diagnosis towards EEG correlation of these events.
Great. Now, is there any study correlating NIRS monitoring and AEG simultaneously in neonatal seizures?
So I'm not aware about this.
No. NIRS is a new tool.
Yeah, no, we
And
use it in a pediatric ICU, but not in the neonatal ICU. So in pediatric ICU, definitely we use NIRS along with the continuous EEG monitoring.
there are
But I am not aware about neonatal seizures.
I am also not aware. Actually, there are many studies on NIRS now in neonates, but nothing in this that was actually I come across correlating NIRS with CFM. So in seizures, probably it's a very an innovative idea. Probably anybody who is who is aware, please feel free to share.
In pediatric ICU, we use NIRS along with the continuous 2-channel EEG monitoring, and definitely studies we have not done till now, but saturations which are normally up to 80-85% come down due to increased metabolic activity during seizures to certainly lower. But definitely I need to look into more studies regarding use of NIRS.
Does each episode of seizure should be treated with loading dose of AED? We can wait for how much period after the previous loading?
Okay, so first of all, you ascertain whether you feel that is really a clinical seizure, or if it is could be non-epileptic event. If it is not leading to your hemodynamic instability and all, you can observe for 1 or 2 seizure. If you feel it is clinical seizure, go for phenobarbital and you wait for the response. And if you continue to have seizure, then go for the loading doses further.
Another
So
question.
clinically, you have to monitor. And if you are put on EEG, then target a EEG cessation of all EEG seizures. Answer with EEG is relatively simpler, that you target all control of all kind of seizures in a EEG. But clinically, you have to make a judgment. If seizures are ongoing, then you need to give loading doses repeated.
Another question: can phenobarbital used prophylactically in severe birth asphyxia? Probably no. Answer is no. Yes, Dr. Renu, you are.
No, there is no role of prophylactic AEDs in neonatal seizures.
Is it advisable to do EEG in a ventilated baby as it causes multiple artifacts?
No, you can do EEG with you have to take care of the EEG artifacts, that is AC artifact. If you switch off that filter, then definitely you can do with ventilated babies. Usually preferred is 11 channel, but definitely you can do 4 or 6 channel montage in ventilated babies. So that's why in HIE kids, because clinical manifestations are really low and these kids are being ventilated, so has to be monitored with the EEG if the facilities are available.
I am not seeing any more questions. I don't know, some Q&A box is. Akash, are you seeing more questions?
Yeah, there is one question: when to discontinue anti-epileptics and how to decide regarding discontinuation of anti-epileptics in neonates. What are the factors to consider?
I think we have taken already this question. You can tell like your rest period 9 hours has been left. There are no further seizure. EEG does not show much discharges. You can decide to stop AEDs. Usually they do not require tapering. You can abruptly stop these drugs. And if you have like a risk factor for ongoing seizures, you take a call based like number of seizures, frequency, number of AEDs required, then you may decide to continue. But most of the kids, in about 2/3 of kid, you can decide to stop AEDs at discharge itself.
One question is how to know if the background slowing is due to anticonvulsants or sedatives, or it is because of the encephalopathy per se.
So that depends what kind of etiology you are thinking. Usually phenobarb leads to more beta activity rather than slowing of background activity. So slowing of background means neuronal dysfunction basically. So these drugs do not affect much of your EEG backgrounds. So slow background means your normally the neonatal EEGs usually have theta kind of activity which is present, and it is usually monomorphic theta kind of background activity with the sleep and awake cycling should be there. So that you can see usually if you have HI, then you have more slow or discontinuous background.
Dr. Ajoy, you want to ask a question? You had raised your hand. If anybody wants to ask any question, he or she can raise his or her hand. Otherwise, we are done with the questions. Yeah, Dr. Subramanian.
Sometimes we are seeing respiratory distress as a manifestation of HIE, and they are responding to phenobarb, sir, respiratory distress. How will you correlate?
So that is more irregular breathing pattern rather than distress. You have episodes of hyperpnea, tachypnea with bradypnea, with apneic episodes. So definite correlation with an EEG, but if you have, then you can suspect.
Okay.
Dr. Amit Suyal, please ask your question.
Ma'am, one of the points you mentioned that the EEG may be normal in 50% of the cases with neonatal seizures. So in such a case, how do we account for as to the EEG being the gold standard in diagnosing a seizure, or how do we try to, 50% is a big number. Maybe the baby is having seizure, but it is not getting recorded in the EEG. So how do we try to go ahead with this? What is an explanation for this?
So the 50% mean your clinically suspected events having an EEG correlation. So in 50% cases in a clinically suspected seizure, there was no electrical correlation. So usually these are non-epileptic phenomena in the newborns. So non-epileptic phenomena can be several, like you can have apnea, you can have jitteriness, you can have increased startle response, brainstem release response, clonic movement, clonus. So that if they are not associated with EEG signature, they are less likely to affect your neuronal function. So in those cases, the risk for neuronal damage is not there. So you may not choose to treat them aggressively as you treat a electroclinical seizure. So that's the mean of 50% time they are not associated with the EEG discharges.
Okay. So,
as I told you in the initial part, most of the neonatal seizures are neocortical in origin. Less frequently, they are subcortical or hypothalamic or brainstem in origin. Neocortical seizures means they are arising from the frontal, parietal, or occipital area. So cortical seizures are usually more common as compared to. And treatment of these non-epileptic event does not affect much of your long-term follow-up. So you can choose to not to treat those conditions also.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, your Manu, sir, your final comments or few take-home messages.
It was a very interesting discussion. I am sorry to miss the first part of your talk, Dr. Renu. Excellent talk, very point oriented, and then a lot of information being transferred. Questions were also very high grade questions. I really impressed by the questions that people have. My just concept about neonatal seizures is that there was a period when we used to, any baby who has seizures used to get anticonvulsants, gone are those days. Now we know that whether you treat or not, the outcome of babies is almost similar in majority of the cases. Why? Because we are wrong about the interpretation of seizures, that as rightly pointed by Dr. Renu, because we just go by our clinical instincts, and that is not right 50% of the time. But then there is another aspect actually. When you deal with a desaturating baby or a baby who is hemodynamically unstable, you can't afford to take the risk of not treating those seizures, because most of us do not have CFM in our unit. So in such scenario, you need to really treat. So you give, but then when you give, you make sure that the treating with anti-convulsant is not the final answer. It is like shooting the messenger. You need to really look at the cause of the seizure. What is the cause? Try to address that. Otherwise, you are not. Your outcome is going to be same whether you treat or not. Excellent session, and Bhatia sir, nice to see you. Uh, Honored to see you. And then, Akash, it was such a nice session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for joining and thank you for doing back-to-back webinars. I think by now you have got used to it.
Thank you.
Bhatia sir, we welcome you. Your final comments. Sir is our past National Neonatology Foundation president, and it is
Sir
always
Sir is a
good to see
legend.
sir.
Sir is a legend by all means.
It has been very extensive coverage, and the questions are too many, and very good questions in there. It has been very extensive and excellent coverage. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Very much.
Can I just make a personal invitation? I would request all of you, those who are not part of the Learn from the Legend series, to kindly join the series to hear the perspectives from the other side of the globe. So next on 22nd July, we have Professor Alan Job, another legend whose definition of BPD still the modified definition along with Professor Bangalari, we all study. So like he is talking about the recent advance in the antenatal steroids, 22 July, 7:30 p.m. And I think Agash, please be kind enough to share the details to them if you can. So invite you for the series. Thank you.
So by now, learning with legends has become the Sholay of neonatology.
Yeah.
Everybody is well aware of it, and everybody is looking forward to it, sir.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
On behalf of all the participants and Lucknow Neonatology Foundation, I thank Dr. V.C. Manoj sir, Bhatia sir for joining us, and Dr. Renu Sudhar for, despite a busy schedule, for consenting to deliver a talk and staying for more than an hour. And in fact, it is 10:30 now, beyond the timeline, and answering all the queries patiently. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was pleasure having you here, and we look forward to more sessions with you in future.
Thank you, Dr. Akash. Thank you, Dr. Manoj. Thank you,
Thank you.
Bhatia sir. Thank you for inviting me here. It was an excellent learning opportunity for me also, because it's information exchange is usually vice versa. So I also learned a lot from the neonatologist, because sitting on a bedside is a difficult thing. Sitting in a lab with EG, and we usually enter when the seizures are usually refractory or they are not responding to the first two ADs, we comes into the picture. So it's always good to learn with other specialities. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
Thank you, Dr. Valeria, for joining us from Europe. Thank you, sir. Have a good night. Let's call it a
Thank
night today. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night. Good night.